In the outskirts of New England, whispers tell of a creature once buried beneath the ancient forest, a being they call Labu. No one knows where it truly came from, a banished monster from another world, or the spawn of age-old nightmares. But one thing is certain, it never dies. Anyone who hears the chattering grind of its teeth in the dark vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only bones gnawed clean and a strange glimmering tooth that seems disturbingly alive. The old wooden cabin lay deep within the New England forest, where Marjorie Hale and her son Ethan had just moved after years of being pressed into the chaos of city life. Marjorie hoped this remote refuge might soothe the wounds carved into them both, the boy still drowning in the loss of his father, and herself, brittle with grief. Yet from the moment they stepped inside, the air carried a weight that could not be explained away. The walls sagged with rot, flaking paint, peeling like shriveled skin. The floor groaned beneath each step, as if resenting their presence. Beyond the windows, the forest loomed like an endless wall, its branches intertwined, stretching outward like massive hands intent on blocking any escape. Marjorie whispered reassurance inside her own mind, telling herself it was only the strangeness of a new place. But deep within, she recognized that the silence here was not peace. It was a breath held too long, waiting to break. On their first night, the wind shrieked through the cracks, carrying with it the damp stench of rotting leaves. Marjorie lay awake on the ancient bed, eyes wide against the dark. Then, from somewhere within the forest, came a sound. A brittle clicking, the unmistakable gnash of teeth, near, then far, then suddenly rasping right against the window pane. In the room beside hers, Ethan shifted in his sleep, his small bed rattling as if footsteps circled around it. Marjorie held her breath, heart hammering in her chest, as a single thought gnawed at her mind. The tranquility she had sought was nothing but a fragile veil, stretched thin over a nightmare waiting to be awakened. The next morning, a heavy fog smothered the forest, swallowing the sun as though it had never risen. Marjorie awoke exhausted, her mind still echoing with the brittle grinding of teeth from the night before. Ethan sat motionless at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his expression so empty it was impossible to guess what he had endured in the dark. While cleaning, Marjorie discovered a strange mark on the porch, deep, parallel gouges as though something had clawed through the wood with dozens of sharp talons. Wedged within the splintered cracks, something glimmered. She pried it loose, a long, unnaturally pointed tooth, its surface slick and gleaming, cold as steel. She slipped it into her pocket before Ethan could notice, though a creeping dread gnawed at her chest. That afternoon, she resolved to learn more about the land they had come to. In the small town's general store, locals turned wary and evasive at the mention of her new address. Only one woman responded, an ancient figure seated in the corner, her tangled silver hair framing eyes that seemed to sink into darkness. She called herself Hazel, the oldest surviving resident of the town. Her voice carried no emotion, as though reciting a curse. The forest had once been marked by an ancient being, one the native people had named in a trembling whisper. Labu. It was neither animal nor spirit, but a living entity that fed upon human souls. Those who heard the gnashing of its teeth would soon see, in their dreams, a smile stretched grotesquely from ear to ear. And once it appeared in a dream, escape was no longer possible. Marjorie left the store with her hands trembling, her coat pocket heavy with the sharp, unnatural tooth. Hazel's warning rang in her mind like metal scraping against metal. She did not want to believe it, yet denial was impossible. The silence of the forest was nothing more than a
have a
shroud,
visitor.
hiding something that had been waiting far too long. Jenny, Eldigai. Night fell faster than usual, darkness swallowing the last streaks of color along the horizon. Marjorie sat at her desk, struggling to focus on the page before her. But her thoughts never drifted far from the gleaming tooth. It lay in the drawer, yet seemed to whisper into the silence, a faint clicking sound that prickled her skin with cold dread. Ethan sat in the corner of the room, his gaze fixed on the black expanse of forest outside the window. He said nothing, but his eyes refused to turn away. Marjorie almost told him to go to bed, but hesitation froze her tongue. Some irrational fear that if she looked away, even for a heartbeat, something from the darkness would step inside. That night, the nightmare came for Ethan. He dreamed of a forest unfamiliar, where the moon had been devoured and only a pale, sickly glow remained, cast from countless jagged teeth jutting up from the soil. They clattered together in a deafening chorus, a death-rattle symphony without end. From within that forest of teeth, a pair of hollow eyes opened, and slowly, a smile stretched wide, curling grotesquely to the ears. Ethan jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his back slick with cold fear. In town, news spread quickly. A young girl named Janice had vanished along the path leading into the woods. Police launched a search, but all they found was her bloodied backpack and scattered shards of bone, pale as chalk. Sheriff Duane insisted it was the work of wild animals, a bear perhaps or wolves. But those who saw the remains swore the bite marks were too long, too sharp, to belong to any earthly beast. Marjorie joined the search party, and near the trail's edge she found something she could no longer ignore. Nestled among rotting leaves was a tooth, the length of her finger, gleaming as though freshly polished. When she lifted it, it quivered faintly in her hand, alive with some unnatural pulse, and the sound of grinding teeth throbbed directly in her skull. That night, back at the cabin, she placed the two teeth together. They clicked against one another, a brittle rhythm that sounded disturbingly like words in a language beyond human comprehension. Marjorie froze, breath caught in her throat. Ethan entered the room, his face pale, and whispered that he had seen the smile again in his dreams. Without a single word between them, Marjorie understood. The darkness in the forest was no rumor. It was real, and it was reaching for them. After Janice's mysterious death, the small town sank into uneasy silence. Doors were locked before dusk, streets emptied long before the sun was gone. Yet Sheriff Duane clung to his explanation that wild animals were to blame. His words echoed through the loudspeakers in brittle monotony, dry and meaningless. A thin curtain straining to hide the truth, bleeding slowly from the forest. Marjorie knew better. The two teeth in her drawer never ceased their clicking, striking one another in the silence of the room. By night, the sound burrowed straight into her skull, carried on an unseen current that dragged with it fragmented whispers. They spoke of hunger, of a smile widening in the dark. Ethan grew paler with each day, his eyes open wide through the nights, for whenever he dared to close them, he was crushed again by visions of teeth erupting from the earth, hemming him in. One morning, a figure waiting on the porch froze Marjorie in her tracks. It was Richard Cole, an anthropology professor and an old acquaintance from her university years. He had heard that Marjorie had moved here, and more importantly, he had heard of the disappearances. Richard was not surprised. If anything, he seemed to have been expecting it. He opened a worn leather-bound journal, revealing pages filled with faded sketches of a grotesque figure, a gaunt, hunched body, a mouth cleaved nearly across the face, bristling with hundreds of disordered teeth. Richard explained that in the folklore of an ancient tribe once rooted in these lands, there existed a being called Labu. Born of hunger and darkness, it had been sealed beneath the earth through ritual sacrifice. Yet, when that seal weakened, Labu would return, hunting by planting fear and drawing its victims into dreams, where it shredded the soul before ever touching the flesh. Marjorie was struck numb. Ethan's nightmares, the teeth in her possession, everything matched Richard's words. But the most terrifying revelation lay in a line from the old manuscripts. Whoever keeps its teeth shall be the first to be devoured. That night, the grinding no longer came from the drawer. It seeped from the walls, from the floorboards, from the window frames. The wooden house seemed to sprout invisible teeth, clattering against one another in endless hunger. Ethan clutched his head. His scream caught silent in his throat, while his wide eyes reflected a sickly green light from some source unseen. Richard stood frozen, his face ashen, the realization striking him like a blade. Labu was not merely hunting. It had already caught their scent. Outside, the wind ceased. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. From the forest, the clicking rose in a frenzied chorus, a death march rattling through the night, heralding that fear was no longer rumor. It had spread like a plague without form. And at its center, Marjorie's house had become the gathering place for a thing that had waited centuries to wake. That night, the wooden house seemed to transform into a colossal body. Every crack exhaled a clicking rhythm, the sound spreading everywhere like the gnash of 1,000 teeth. Marjorie sat frozen, her fingers clenching the ring of keys, but the whispers seeped into her skull, thick and sticky as sap. They carried no language she recognized, yet their meaning was undeniable. Let us in. Let us taste. Ethan lay curled on the bed, his small frame trembling. His eyes stared wide at the ceiling, where the cracks slowly warped. From the timber, jagged teeth sprouted, lengthening, clattering against one another before breaking loose and falling like hail made of bone. Each piece struck the floor with a high-pitched chime, warped and shrill, like a child's laughter twisted out of shape. Richard Cole scribbled furiously into his journal, sweat streaming down his temple. He muttered of an infiltration stage, the moment when the entity marked its prey. But his words no longer carried knowledge. They read like a death sentence, written out loud in real time. Marjorie rushed to the bed and pulled Ethan into her arms. His body was ice cold, lips tinged blue, his mouth moving faintly. She pressed her ear to him and nearly screamed. Ethan's voice was gone. From his throat came only the rhythmic clatter of teeth, perfectly in sync with the house chorus. Darkness thickened around them, not an ordinary absence of light, but a viscous shroud where twisted forms writhed and pressed against reality. Within it, a grin unfurled, stretching ear to ear, illuminated by a sickly green glow. Labubu did not step through the door. It split out from the air itself, as if the house had been its womb all along. Its hollow eyes fixed upon Ethan. Marjorie felt the pull of an invisible force, wrenching her son from her embrace. His body rose, suspended in the air, while the teeth erupting from the walls angled toward him, clattering like a triumphant hymn for the predator's feast. Richard screamed without sound, scrawling frantic tribal sigils across the floor with chalk. But the markings dissolved instantly, swallowed whole as though licked clean by the dark. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, realizing every fragment of knowledge he carried was nothing, mere scraps of paper before a hunger older than language. Marjorie lunged, gripping Ethan's hand. A green luminescence spread across his skin, veins glowing like half-chewed strands. In his eyes reflected the vision of an endless forest of teeth, waiting to consume his soul. Then, amid the frenzy of grinding jaws, the room filled with a chorus of whispers. No longer vague, but sharp and merciless. He is mine. You will witness. You will surrender. Marjorie felt her blood congeal in her veins. She understood. Labubu had chosen Ethan, and her role here was never chance. She was meant to bear witness, or pay the price to keep her son. Outside, the forest convulsed. Leaves rustled, not with the wind, but with the rhythm of countless unseen teeth, laughing. The cabin shook, planks splitting away to reveal a yawning abyss beneath, as though the earth itself were opening its jaws. In that instant, Marjorie knew the nightmare was no longer Ethan's alone. It had stepped into reality, and nothing could stop it. The house collapsed inward like a cage, its wooden walls splitting apart to reveal massive teeth jutting from the darkness beyond. Labubu emerged, gaunt, hunched, its mouth splitting half its face, lined with hundreds of teeth crowding together, jagged and uneven like a forest of silver blades. Its hollow eyes locked onto Ethan, suspended in the air, his body bathed in a green glow that shone like a beacon of death. Marjorie lunged forward, desperate to wrench her son free from the invisible force. Her fingers brushed his hand, but Ethan's body was dissolving into ash, pulled toward the gnashing maw of the abyss. The whispers thundered now, sharp and merciless. He is mine. You will surrender. Richard fell to his knees, mumbling fragments of ancient incantations, but every word evaporated the instant it left his lips. Human knowledge crumbled against the raw, primal hunger of the beast. All he could do was witness, helpless, as the monstrous mouth yawned open at the center of the room. Marjorie clutched Ethan tightly, her eyes blazing with defiance. From deep within, she understood. To save her child, another soul must be offered, and the only soul left was her own. Teeth rained around them, gleaming like a storm of knives. She drew one last breath, whispering into her son's ear, "Live." With the final strength in her body, Marjorie thrust Ethan out of the green radiance, hurling him into Richard's arms. At that instant, she was lifted, dragged straight into Labu's gaping mouth. Her scream was swallowed whole, merging with the relentless clatter of teeth as the house convulsed like a body choking down the last trace of light. Then, silence. The cabin stood still, lifeless. Ethan lay unconscious in Richard's embrace. Marjorie was gone, leaving only a void of cold air. At the center of the ruined floor, one long tooth still glowed, pulsing faintly, clicking in a steady rhythm, like the breath of something asleep, waiting. Richard carried Ethan from the cabin, never daring to look back. Yet in the forest's darkness, the sound continued, grinding teeth, unbroken, endless. Labubu had retreated, but it had not vanished. It was waiting for the next hand to pick up the tooth that remained. And when that moment came, the cycle would begin again. Ainun Parwat. Highway 666, the road renamed, yet the curse never left. In the endless desert night, trucks and cars vanished without a trace. Whispers speak of the hells chasing lost souls, and radios carrying the cries of the dead. Frank Harlow was no stranger to the dark. 30 years behind the wheel of an interstate rig had taught him how silence on the midnight highway could twist a man's thoughts out of shape. But tonight felt different. The fastest route to his delivery forced him through a stretch of asphalt, once marked by unnamed drivers, still spoke in hushed tones. Highway 666. The road signs had changed, the numbers replaced, but the memories and the rumors had not. Younger drivers whispered about headlights swallowed whole by the black, about scorched tire marks etched into the pavement as though clawed there by something unseen. Some swore they had glimpsed massive dogs, eyes glowing like burning coals, sprinting alongside 18-wheelers at 70 miles per hour. No proof was ever offered. No one laughed. That night, Frank pulled out of a rest stop just shy of midnight. His cab reeked of cigarettes and stale coffee. He flicked on the radio. Only static and garbled whispers met him. With a sigh, he switched it off, leaving nothing but the steady growl of the engine and the hiss of desert wind across the windshield. The highway stretched straight and merciless, desert shadows spreading on either side, an ocean of black with no light save for his twin yellowed beams cutting ahead. Frank sipped his coffee, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Empty, yet the weight of being followed clung to him, pressing harder with every mile. A memory surfaced. Years ago, a fellow driver had vanished on this very stretch. His truck was found abandoned on the shoulder, the cab torn to pieces. Inside, nothing. No blood. No body. Just claw marks raked deep into the asphalt, trailing off into the sand. Frank shook the image away, but the deeper he drove, the heavier the air seemed, as though something unseen pressed against the glass. His headlights barely pierced a few yards ahead before the night devoured them whole. He eased back on the throttle and lit another cigarette. Through the thin veil of smoke, something flickered on the shoulder ahead, two faint red glows. They flashed, vanished, then returned. Eyes. Aye. Frank blinked hard, his heart pounding. He pressed his foot down. The speedometer climbed, the engine howled. Still, in the corner of his vision, those two red lights lingered, keeping pace with effortless calm. His hands locked white-knuckled on the wheel. Highway 666, renamed or not, had never needed a sign to mark its territory. Some places don't need names to haunt you. And Frank knew with every mile he pushed deeper that he had driven straight into its heart. Nimin, Dalkao. The clock read just past 1:00 a.m. Frank had driven more than 40 miles without passing a single pair of headlights. The desert silence seemed to swallow even the roar of his engine. He switched the radio back on, anything to drown the feeling that he was drifting into some endless black pit. At first it was only static, the familiar hiss and crackle. He reached for the dial to shut it off when something slid into the noise, a guttural growl, low and predatory, like an animal stalking unseen in the brush. Frowning, Frank twisted the tuner. The frequencies shifted, but the sound remained. Worse, it blended with something else, a voice. Help me. Frank froze. The words were faint, distorted, buried under layers of static, but unmistakable. He leaned closer to the radio, disbelieving. Then the cabin filled with overlapping cries, screams calling out names, the shriek of brakes locking, the crunch of metal twisting on impact. The truck seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the sounds. Frank gripped the wheel tighter, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For the briefest flash, he caught it, something slipping through the edge of his taillights. 4 legs, a stretched body, eyes burning red. When he looked again, the road was empty. The radio wailed with one long, piercing note, then fell silent. Frank inhaled sharply, palms damp with sweat. The old stories clawed at his mind. Drivers who swore their radios had come alive before the crash, replaying their own voices, pleading, screaming, begging. His headlights flickered. Along the right shoulder, a few dozen yards away, 2 shapes loped beside his rig. Not dogs. Not anything he had words for. Their backs rose as high as the cab's windows, their fur bristling black and gray, eyes glowing like coals whipped by wind. Frank slammed his foot down. The speedometer climbed, the wheels screamed against the asphalt, sparks bursting in his mirrors. But the shadows never fell behind. They held their distance, pacing him with effortless precision, as if toying with him. Then the radio snapped on again. A new voice emerged, rasping, frantic, gasping for breath. "They're coming. They won't stop." Frank's stomach turned to ice. He knew the voice. It was his own. The cab grew colder, desert air outside forgotten, replaced by a chill that cut to the bone. Frank's eyes locked on the endless stretch of blacktop, but his heart understood the truth. He was no longer alone on Highway 666. The clock ticked past 1 in the morning. The highway ahead devoured his headlights whole. No gas stations, no signs, no other travelers. Frank felt as though he were driving inside a loop with no exit, a stretch of road repeating itself forever. The engine's steady growl was no longer the loudest sound in the cab. From the radio came a storm of voices, pleas for help layered over the shriek of brakes, the crunch of tearing metal, and beneath it all, a guttural growl that crawled under his skin. This time, Frank didn't reach for the dial. He knew the truth. The radio would come alive whether he wanted it to or not. In the rearview mirror, the darkness stretched, unbroken. Then, a spark of red. Eyes, another pair, and another. Within seconds, the blackness behind him glowed like a pit of embers. An entire pack was following, silent, relentless, hungry. Frank yammed his foot down. The speedometer broke past 80. The truck shuddered violently, tires screaming against the asphalt. Still, the pack did not fall behind. They fanned out on either side, massive bodies keeping pace with impossible speed. Long tongues lolled from gaping jaws, teeth flashing white and wet in the glare of his lights. One lunged. Its claws scraped the steel door with a screech that tore through Frank's skull, leaving deep gouges that glistened like open wounds. He gritted his teeth, wrestling to steady the rig. One wrong slip and the 18-wheeler would become his coffin of steel. The radio erupted again, this time with laughter. A harsh, rasping laugh, like it rose from a throat scorched in fire. Between the bursts of static and mirth, Frank heard his name, whispered, and then shouted, over and over, each time closer. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs. Sweat poured down his neck, soaking his collar. He kept his eyes locked forward, refusing to look at the glowing eyes swarming beside him. Yet they filled his mirrors, dozens of predatory glares reflecting his every move. Frank no longer needed convincing. He was prey, and the pack was closing in. Highway 666 was no highway at all. It was a ritual, a hunt in which survival was never the prize. The truck wailed in protest, tearing through the night as though it too understood the futility. And deep down, Frank knew the worst had not yet come. The chase twisted into nightmare. Frank crushed the accelerator so hard his foot trembled, yet the needle crawled forward sluggishly, as though an unseen hand were dragging the truck backward. On either side, the hellhounds skimmed the tires, claws sparking fire as they raked the asphalt. One leapt, latching onto the side of the cab, its jaws sinking into the steel as if it were paper. Frank jerked the wheel, the rig lurching violently. The beast fell away, but another replaced it instantly. Their snarls and screeches rose like a chorus, blending with the engine's tortured roar, a sound on the brink of tearing itself apart. The headlights flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. From the radio came not cries for help, but the cacophony of catastrophe. Metal folding in on itself, brakes shrieking, voices cut short in mid-scream. Frank knew every sound, every detail. They were the same noises from years ago, the night his co-workers vanished without a trace. The cab grew icy. The rearview mirror no longer reflected the road, but shimmered with a raw, blood-red glow, like flames seen through smoke. Within it, warped faces surfaced, melted, disfigured, mouths stretched open in silent screams. Frank's heart pounded violently. His grip on the wheel tore skin, blood smearing the leather. He dared not blink. Suddenly, the highway ahead erupted into light, splitting open with jagged fissures, molten seams blazing like rivers of lava. Tires tore across the cracked surface, smoke and the stench of burning rubber flooding into the cab. The pack howled in unison, a dreadful symphony that shook the desert sky. In that instant, Frank understood he was no longer driving on Earth. The highway had transformed into a vein of living fire, dragging him into its heart. The radio broke once more, its voice low and desiccated, as though the road itself had spoken. "You have arrived." Frank screamed, but his cry was devoured, swallowed by the engine's roar and the unending howl of the hounds that echoed across the wasteland. "Nine, I." The sky grayed with the promise of dawn, but along that stretch of highway, the light never reached. As the first pale rays broke, a husband and wife pulled their car over, unsettled by the acrid stench of something burnt still hanging in the air. In the emptiness of the road lay a scar, the asphalt scorched black, twisted into a jagged streak that seemed to writhe across the pavement. Torn shreds of rubber clung to the shoulder, a few warped fragments of steel glimmered faintly. But nothing else. No oil slick, no blood, no wreckage, only silence. The husband muttered about a truck fire in the night, but his wife shook her head, her gaze fixed on something stranger. The black scar did not fade. It spread, pulsing outward like veins beneath the skin of the highway, seeping deeper into the asphalt as though alive. From the horizon, the wind stirred, carrying not the sound of traffic nor the whisper of desert sand, but a murmur. Low, ragged whispers. Dozens of throats rasping the name of someone unseen. The wife's pulse hammered as she rolled the windows shut, while her husband started the engine, desperate to escape. Their radio crackled, country music shattering into static. A hoarse, frantic voice cut through. "They are coming. Run!" The wife froze. She knew that voice. It was not a stranger's. It was Frank Harlow, the trucker who had vanished on this highway years ago, now echoing back from the darkness. The couple sped away, leaving the ashen scar smoldering in their wake. Behind them, Highway 666 swallowed every trace, as though nothing had ever happened. Yet in the shadows, the red eyes stirred again, waiting to fasten themselves to the wheels of whoever dared wander next. The highway does not end. It only waits. Naha. Amid the snowbound peaks of the Sierra Nevada, the name Donner lingers like a curse. In the winter of 1846, a wagon party was trapped in the storms, forced to consume one another to survive. Locals whisper that whenever a blizzard rises, the old cabin where they once huddled flares to life again. Inside, withered skeletons sit eternally around the table, beckoning lost travelers to join a feast without end, where the meat is always warm. The storm came without warning, swallowing the Sierra Nevada in a suffocating white sea. Nathan, leading his group of 3 hikers, fought to find a path through the leaning pines, but the blizzard erased every trace of the trail. Their breaths puffed out in frozen clouds, each step sinking thigh-deep into the snow. Nightfall dropped swiftly, draping the mountains in a dim, oppressive shroud. The cold sliced through skin and bone, numbing Nathan's fingers even through his gloves. Hunger gnawed at them, tremors racked their bodies, and fear seeped in with every step. They no longer knew which direction led back to camp. All that remained was the sensation of being swallowed alive by a labyrinth of ice. Just as despair took hold, a shape loomed through the storm. A weather-beaten cabin, roof sagging under a heavy crown of snow, its doorway nearly buried. Nathan stumbled forward, shouldered open the groaning door, and was met by a gust of air thick with mildew, rotting wood, and the faint tang of old smoke. Inside, weak light filtered through cracks, falling on layers of dust. The cabin was cramped, its timber walls split with age, yet it still bore the trace of human habitation. Around a mold-stained table sat 3 skeletons, slumped as if caught mid-meal. Their hollow sockets bored into the gloom, jaws sagging open as though their final words had frozen in their throats. In the corner, the stone hearth lay long extinguished, though the blackened ash still clung like a shadow. Scattered across the floor were fragments of bone half buried in dirt. The place did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, arranged by some unseen hand only moments before, waiting for the next act to begin. The wind outside shrieked through the gaps in the walls, stretching into a mournful moan. Nathan stood frozen, the chill of the rotting boards seeping into his legs. Death had never left this cabin. It was only waiting for the next soul to step inside. Naya. Night fell faster than they expected. Outside, the blizzard screamed and smothered the entrance, sealing the cabin into their only refuge. Nathan and his 2 companions fed the hearth with rotting timber. The fire cracked to life, casting a jaundiced glow across the warped wooden walls, illuminating the 3 skeletons still seated in silence around the table. The air was thick with damp and mildew, but soon something else began to seep through. At first, it was only the faint tang of ancient ash. Then, as the flames roared brighter, a greasy scent spread, sharp and cloying, like burning fat. Nathan frowned. None of them carried food. And yet, the unmistakable odor of roasting flesh filled the room. A sound stirred near the hearth. At first, the faint pop of splintering wood. Then a steady clack, clack, clack. The cadence of a knife striking a cutting board. An old pot balanced on the stones began to tremble, rattling softly before exploding in a metallic clang, as though an unseen hand had hurled a spoon against its side. The froze. The cabin was small, every corner visible, yet no figure stood there. Only the lifeless relics quivered in the firelight, animated by some invisible force. Nathan swallowed hard, telling himself it was only exhaustion conjuring illusions. But then the pot's lid snapped open, revealing ash gone cold, and within it, charred fragments of bone. A ribbon of smoke uncoiled upward, twisting like a beckoning finger before dissolving into the gloom, leaving behind a stench of scorched flesh that thickened the air. Footsteps followed, soft, deliberate, dragging, circling the table. The skeletons remained unmoving in their chairs, but the empty space between them seemed to swell with a darkness more solid than shadow. On the table, a cracked wooden bowl inched forward, scraping until it halted before Nathan. In the shifting firelight, it looked freshly placed, as though by a host eager to serve. The wood even seemed warm to the touch. Outside, the storm howled like a starving beast. Inside, the air pressed heavy and close, suffocating, charged with the quiet anticipation of invisible guests, preparing a feast not meant for the living. By me. The fire roared higher, though they had fed it nothing more. Its sickly glow spilled across the warped walls, stretching shadows into grotesque shapes. For an instant, it seemed the skeletons hunched at the table were stirring, necks lolling forward, then snapping upright again in the blink of an eye. Nathan rubbed his eyes, blaming exhaustion, but when he looked back, the table had transformed. The cracked wooden bowls, empty when they first entered, now brimmed with steaming cuts of meat. Thick, red, glistening slices, releasing a savory scent that clawed at their starved stomachs. Hunger stabbed at Nathan's gut like needles, wearing down every instinct to resist. One of his companions, weaker than the rest, trembled as he reached for a piece. In the firelight, it resembled venison or wild boar, something plausible in these mountains. He shoved it into his mouth, chewing greedily, teeth grinding with frantic abandon. At first, Nathan only felt envy at the sound of flesh between his companion's teeth. But then, the firelight shifted, and Nathan saw it. Embedded in the glossy meat was a scorched fingernail, jutting from pale sinew. A long, charred strand of hair clung to his friend's lip, singed and acrid. The man didn't notice, only chewed faster, eyes bulging, face flushed in delirious satisfaction. Nathan's breath caught, his blood running cold. He tried to scream, but his throat was sandpaper, too dry to form sound. More platters appeared on the table, neatly arranged, still steaming. What had smelled rich now reeked of roasted flesh and burnt blood. The cabin shifted. From the corners rose whispers, at first single syllables, then twisted invitations, lullabies warped and muffled as if sung through soil. Each murmur raised the hair on Nathan's skin, as though the rotten floor itself was pleading. And then came another sound, the wail of a child. Thin, relentless, muffled as though it seeped up from beneath the boards. The air turned brittle with cold. Nathan looked back, and his heart froze. One of the skeletons had moved. Its skull, once slumped, was now lifted, eyeless hollows fixed on him. Its jaw worked soundlessly, yet its rhythm matched the whispers surrounding them. The chair groaned under its shifting weight, as if it prepared to rise. The second friend collapsed into sobs, clutching his head, babbling nonsense. His gaze flicked from the food to the bone figures, and then, in a frenzy, he lunged at the table. He snatched up a half-burnt femur, still streaked with flesh, and sank his teeth in. Blackened blood oozed down his chin, pattering onto the wood below. The cabin shook. Pots and pans clattered like war drums, their tempo quickening, urging. Footsteps, dozens, heavy and hurried, circled them, closing the trap. Nathan understood then. The banquet had never ended. The Donner dead, once starving, once cannibals, remained. The bones were husks. Their spirits lingered, hosting, serving, waiting for strays to join their feast. His vision blurred. In a blink, the cabin swarmed with gaunt phantoms, skin shredded, jaws working, mouths smeared crimson, hands reaching. The skeletons rose from their chairs, vertebrae cracking, heads twisting at impossible angles, welcoming the newcomers. Nathan staggered back, his spine pressed to the icy wall. But he knew there was no escape. The cabin's door was gone, swallowed by the dark. Only the fire remained, burning bright and red, lighting the endless feast of the starving dead who hammered their rhythm, calling him to the table. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It had become a living banquet hall. Fire roared in the hearth, casting the walls in a frenzy of dancing shadows, shapes of shredded bodies swaying and gnawing, though in truth only 3 living men remained. Yet, to Nathan, the room was overflowing with guests. Invisible diners leaned close to their feast, every eyeless stare fixed upon him. The first companion, the one who had eaten first, slumped over the table, his shoulders jerking in violent spasms. His spine jutted sharp against his skin as ragged flesh tore open, exposing the raw meat beneath. Nathan watched in horror as ribs surfaced, splitting through as though some unseen butcher worked from within. But no blood spilled, only the choking perfume of fat sizzling on coals, sweet and rancid, filling every breath. The second friend still clutched his charred bone, but now a hoarse laughter bubbled from his throat. His eyes clouded white, his tongue lolling, black blood dribbling down his chin. When he lifted his head, Nathan recoiled. His face was collapsing inward, cheeks hollowing, teeth lengthening into jagged fangs. Rents in his flesh stretched wider, splitting to reveal a second mouth, yawning across his throat. The whispers surged, clearer than before. Sit with us. Eat with us. Hungry. Lost one? Their voices slithered into Nathan's skull, weaving with the gnawing ache in his belly. His hands trembled. Even knowing the source, the scent of roasting meat made his jaw ache with want, saliva filling his mouth against his will. Across the table, a bowl slid toward him. Inside, a slab of charred flesh still dripped with grease, hissing as it struck the wood. Nathan shook his head, backing away, but the unseen diners pressed closer. Footsteps shuffled all around, slow and circling. Cold breath slid along his neck, whispering hunger. The second friend screamed suddenly, head snapping back with a crack of bone. Then he dropped forward, plunging his face into the platter, tearing chunks with his new-grown fangs. The sound of chewing filled the cabin, obscene and animal. Nathan saw him not as a man, but as the latest guest welcomed to the Donner table. Everywhere, jaws worked, teeth cracked bone. The skeletons had risen now, their empty sockets following Nathan's every movement. Their jaws hung open in wide, grinning invitations. With a gesture, they beckoned. With their silence, they commanded. Nathan doubled over, clutching his stomach as hunger twisted into agony. Something gnawed at him from inside. The meat before him blurred, then sharpened again, shimmering golden, almost holy in its allure. A whisper brushed against his ear, so close it seemed spoken from his own skull. "If you do not eat, you will be eaten." Nathan staggered back until his shoulders struck the wall. He knew the truth now. In the Donner cabin, there was no escape, no mercy. One either sat down to eat, or became the meal. Yee. Nathan forced himself to stand in the circle of shadows, stomach writhing as the scent of roasted flesh clung to every breath. The whispers surged, relentless, pounding like a drum beat in his skull. "Sit down. Eat. Join us." The skeletal figures circled the table, jaws clattering like funeral drums. The first companion was nothing more than a husk now, face buried in his plate, black smoke curling from his back, as though his body smoldered from within. The second, no longer human, lifted his head, eyes milky white, mouth split wide to his ears. He held out a glistening hunk of red meat toward Nathan, blood dripping onto the wooden floor in steady taps. Nathan croaked a dry scream, shaking his head, but his throat was too parched, his knees buckled with weakness. And then he heard it, another voice whispering beside his ear. Not a stranger's voice, but his own, warped and echoing from the dark. "You've already chosen. The table never runs out of chairs." Strength drained from him. He collapsed into the waiting chair. At once, the empty bowl before him filled, piled high with steaming flesh, the aroma suffocating. The skeletons pounded their bony hands against the table in ghoulish celebration, the clatter rising like a cheer. Firelight flickered over Nathan's face as it changed, eyes sinking into hollows, skin blanched, jaw twitching in spasms. His trembling fingers lifted a morsel to his lips. The moment his teeth pierced the meat, the cabin shuddered as if exhaling in relief. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a chorus of chewing, wet, relentless, eternal. Nathan's own sounds joined them. The grind of teeth through tendon, the convulsions of his throat as he swallowed. Outside, the storm ebbed. Dawn spread its pale shroud across the Sierra Nevada, and the cabin grew still again. Its door remained buried, its timbers dark, no trace of life left within. Only the table endured, set neatly with 3 skeletons, sitting in solemn vigil. On the 4th chair sat a new figure, rigid and pale, eyes hollow, jaw agape in a permanent invitation. The wind slipped through the cracks in the wall, carrying the faintest murmur. "We are still waiting." "Ah, woo." I never thought I'd dig through Craigslist for work. Not because I was too good for it, but because Craigslist had a smell to it, like rot under floorboards. Scams, setups, people lured into places they never walked out of. But hunger strips away pride. It was 4 weeks after I got laid off from my receptionist job at a veterinary clinic. They said, budget cuts. I'd been living alone in a crumbling studio on the south end of Glendale, scraping by with leftovers and counting change. Rent was coming fast, and my bank account felt like a noose. When the panic got bad enough, I texted my friend, Ria. She always knew side hustles, flipping furniture, dog sitting, stuff under the table. She told me she'd babysat through Craigslist before. "Check everything," she warned. Sometimes those ads aren't for kids. Sometimes it's bait. I babysat back in school
She told
and
me
thought
she'd
I could
babysat through
handle it.
Craigslist before.
Kids, cartoons, bedtime. How hard could it be? Most of the postings felt wrong. Broken sentences, bad grammar, too much money for too little work. Then I found one that looked clean. Need sitter this Saturday. 2 girls, 5 and 8, 6 p.m. to midnight. We're easygoing. $140 cash. Message for details. Thanks, Dana K. It was tidy, casual, safe. Dana messaged back quick, gave me the address, and said her husband would be home, but leaving soon. She sounded normal, even kind. A smiley face at the end of her note. I checked the address, 71 Willow Bend, a dead-end street tucked near the old rail yard. Run down, but not abandoned. I sent Rhea the details, just in case. Text me when you're in, she said. And if the vibe's wrong, walk out. Don't explain, don't apologize. The night came cold and windy. I pulled up at 5:50. The house was a squat brick thing, windows black, paint peeling from the shutters. A porch swing creaked in the wind. The light above the door flickered like it was dying. Something in me hesitated, but I knocked. It opened after a long silence. A man stood there, early 60s, tall and skeletal. His skin was pale, stretched too tight, eyes sunk into dark hollows. His clothes hung loose, jeans spattered with something dark, a shirt with holes at the collar. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You the sitter?" His voice was dry, like dust in a throat. "Yeah, Dana said to be here at 6. He muttered, rubbing his jaw. "She just ran out with the girls. Should be back soon. Come on in." I hesitated, but stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Metallic, sour, mixed with bleach. The living room was stripped bare, just a stained couch and old newspapers stacked high. No toys. No shoes by the door. Ha! No sign of kids ever living here. He shut the door with a click that sounded louder than it should have. "You can wait in the den," he said, pointing down a shadowed hallway. I sat on the couch instead, forcing a smile. My phone buzzed. Rhea. "You good?" I typed back strange. "No kids here yet. Husband only." The man paced the hall, muttering to himself. Every few minutes he peeked in at me, eyes darting, lips moving like he was rehearsing lines. "She should be back by now," he said more than once. At 6:20, I stood. My skin was crawling. "Maybe I'll just reschedule," I said lightly. He stiffened. His voice cracked into something sharper. "No, she's here. She's downstairs." He gestured toward a door in the kitchen, half hidden behind a curtain. The handle was rusted, paint chipped. "She takes the girls down there sometimes. Games, crafts, go on. She's waiting." The house had gone too quiet. I walked to the door, heart slamming, and opened it. A breath of air rolled up from the dark below, damp earth, rot and copper. My stomach turned. "Go on," he said again. His smile stretched too wide now, gums raw and teeth stained red. I froze. Behind me, the floor creaked. Something moved down in the dark, heavy, dragging, wet. A low moan echoed up, followed by a sound like claws scratching wood. I stepped back fast. Actually, my ride's here. Sorry. I need to. The front door was locked. My fingers slipped on the bolt as he whispered behind me. You haven't even seen them yet. The sound from the basement grew louder. Not children. Not human. The stench of blood thickened in the air. The lock finally gave. I flung the door open and ran, his laughter chasing me out onto the porch. I didn't look back until I was in my car. He stood in the doorway, smiling with his ruined mouth, while something thrashed in the dark behind him. I drove until my lungs burned, parked in a gas station lot, called Rhea, sobbing. She told me to call the cops. I did. Gave the report, gave the address. They said I'd check. 2 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. Hi there. Saw your babysitting profile. 2 kids, easy night. $140 cash. Let us know if you're free. Dana K. Same words. Same bait. Different number. I blocked it. More messages came. New numbers each time. Now, when I scroll job boards, I still see them. Same phrasing, same pay, different names. And I wonder how many others went inside, how many went down the basement stairs, and how many never came back.